A black doctor is humiliated by a white cop in a hospital parking lot, accused of suspicious behavior. What starts as routine escalates into a shocking clash, exposing deep systemic racism and a connection that changes their lives. The doctor's response will astonish everyone. But let's start from the beginning. Dr. Marcus Taylor, a renowned African-American trauma surgeon in his early 40s, steps into the dimly lit hospital parking lot, exhaustion etched into his face. His dark scrubs, faintly creased from an 18-hour shift, still carry the scent of antiseptic and the faint traces of a life saved or lost. The soft jingle of his hospital ID badge, clipped to his pocket, is the only sound accompanying his measured steps across the asphalt. Above, the faint hum of streetlights creates long, lonely shadows in the near-empty lot. Leaning momentarily against his midnight blue sedan, Marcus unlocks his phone to reply to an urgent text from a colleague. His brows furrow as he types, the glow from the screen casting light onto his weary features. The parking lot is otherwise silent, a brief respite after the chaos of the emergency room. Nearby, Officer Bradley Walker, a white cop in his late 30s, cruises the parking lot in his patrol car. His shift, full of monotony and unremarkable incidents, has left him irritable. A decade of patrolling has sharpened his instincts, or what he perceives as instincts, but also embedded unconscious biases he rarely questions. Spotting Marcus by the car, Bradley slows down, the sight sparking a mixture of unease and suspicion. He exits the vehicle, his boots scuffing on the asphalt, and squares his shoulders. "Excuse me, sir," Bradley calls out, his voice clipped, one hand resting instinctively on the butt of his holstered firearm. "What are you doing here?" Startled, Marcus looks up from his phone, confusion flashing across his tired eyes, before he forces a polite tone. "I work here," he replies, gesturing toward the towering hospital building behind him. Bradley's demeanor stiffens. "Prove it," he snaps. Marcus hesitates, his frown deepening. With practiced calm, he retrieves his ID badge and extends it toward Bradley. Snatching it with a quick motion, Bradley scrutinizes the badge, as though searching for evidence of deceit. "This could be fake," Bradley growls. "Step away from the vehicle." Marcus's patience frays for a moment, but he exhales sharply, staying composed. "There's no need for this," he says, his voice steady but edged. The tension thickens, the quiet night now heavy with unspoken conflict. The tense exchange begins to draw attention as nurses and other hospital staff, weary from their own shifts, trickle into the parking lot. Their footsteps slow, conversations hushed to murmurs as they notice Dr. Marcus Taylor being questioned by Officer Bradley Walker. Recognition dawns on their faces, a mix of confusion and indignation spreading through the small crowd. "Hands on the car," Bradley barks, his tone brooking no argument. Marcus freezes, a storm of emotions churning within him, pride, anger, and the instinct to de-escalate. For a long moment, he meets Bradley's gaze, his eyes sharp with restrained defiance. Then, with a sigh, Marcus turns and places his hands on the roof of his sedan. Bradley steps forward, his frisking unnecessarily rough, his movements brusque and impersonal. Gasps ripple through the gathering group. Murmurs swell as the staff recognize Marcus, not just as a colleague, but as a renowned trauma surgeon who has saved countless lives. "Officer!" A voice rings out, cutting through the tension. Clara Hernandez, a nurse in her mid-30s, steps forward, her tone urgent and firm. "That's Dr. Taylor. He saved my nephew's life last month." Bradley glares at her, his hand tightening briefly on his belt. "Ma'am, stay out of this," he snaps, his frustration bleeding through. "If he's innocent, He has nothing to worry about. The crowd bristles at the dismissal, but Bradley is too focused on asserting control to notice. He moves to inspect Marcus's car, his actions deliberate and exaggerated, as though looking for a reason to justify his suspicion. "This is harassment," Marcus finally says, his voice steady but cold. "You're profiling me." Bradley's head snaps toward Marcus, his jaw tightening. Before he can reply, the rumble of an engine cuts through the tension. A sleek black SUV glides into the parking lot, its presence immediately commanding attention. The vehicle comes to a stop, and the door swings open. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit steps out, his polished shoes clicking against the asphalt. Alan Green, the hospital's CEO, surveys the scene with an air of authority that silences even the murmuring crowd. "What's going on here?" Green demands, his sharp gaze flicking between Bradley and Marcus, the weight of his presence hanging heavily in the air. "What's going on here?" Alan Green's commanding voice slices through the heavy silence like a knife. The hospital CEO strides forward, his tailored suit immaculate under the harsh parking lot lights. His sharp tone and confident posture draw the attention of everyone present, causing even the murmuring staff to fall silent. Officer Bradley Walker straightens instinctively, his demeanor faltering for the first time. The authority radiating from Green is palpable. "This man was acting suspiciously," Bradley begins defensively, gesturing toward Marcus. "I was ensuring he belonged here." Green's piercing gaze shifts to Marcus, then back to Bradley. The scrutiny is intense, deliberate. "Dr. Taylor," Green says slowly, emphasizing each word, "is my chief trauma surgeon. The man who saved my wife's life after her car accident last year." His voice sharpens as his eyes narrow further. Does that sound like someone who doesn't belong? A collective gasp ripples through the gathered staff, many of whom already knew Marcus's reputation, but are now stunned by this revelation. Bradley's face drains of color as the weight of his mistake begins to sink in. He falters, trying to salvage his position. "I was just doing my job," he stammers, his voice losing its earlier confidence. Green's expression hardens, his tone cutting and uncompromising. "Your job," he snaps, "is to protect this community, not to humiliate the very people who uphold it." The crowd stirs, murmurs of agreement and indignation rising among the staff. Clara Hernandez stands at the forefront, her arms crossed, glaring at Bradley. Marcus, still standing by his car, remains composed, but his tightly clenched jaw and steely gaze betray his simmering anger. "Are you okay, Doctor?" Green asks, his voice softening slightly as he turns to Marcus. "I'm fine," Marcus replies, his tone even, but edged with restrained fury. "But this is unacceptable." Green nods, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I agree, and it will be addressed." His eyes flick briefly back to Bradley, a silent promise of accountability. The tension in the parking lot hangs heavy as everyone waits for the next move. The next morning, the incident is the talk of the hospital. Clara posts a video of the confrontation on social media, and it goes viral. Community outrage mounts, calling for accountability. Bradley is called into his supervisor's office, where he faces suspension pending an investigation. Meanwhile, Green publicly apologizes to Marcus, vowing to address systemic racism within the hospital and its surrounding community. Marcus, initially reluctant, agrees to speak at a town hall. He shares his experience, using it as a platform to advocate for bias training and better community police relations. As the town grapples with its biases, Marcus's grace and determination inspire change. Bradley, humbled by the backlash and introspection, eventually reaches out to Marcus to apologize. Their conversation, though tense, ends with a glimmer of hope. "We have a long way to go," Marcus says. But acknowledging the problem is the first step.